Hey everyone, so here will be the trade recaps for Euro US dollar, GBP US dollar, as well as AUD US dollar for a total of 66R yesterday on the 24th of August. So let's start off with EU. So you can see that when we had this big push over here during the news the previous day, we pushed up into this last 15-minute sell zone over here, but we failed to close above it, grabbing the liquidity above. We also have this bunch of imbalances that we've yet to fill, so the pullback was definitely incoming after that big push up. So if you're already anticipating the pullback coming the next day, what you can do is, I don't trade the Asian session. So when I came in during London, I saw that we already had previous BOS on the 15-minute, which indicates that yes, we are still continuing to be bearish. So I was looking for shorts towards these two demand zones at the bottom here, which caused this big push up. During the London Open, I saw that price tapped into this last 15-minute sell zone that had the break of structure, so I dropped down to the 1 minute. Given that we are bearish on the higher time frames, shorts are pro-trend. So for me, once price hit this 15-minute sell zone over here, I was waiting for the 1 minute to change its structure again. So we see it happening over here when we have this break of structure and the demand zone failing. So I looked at the extreme part of the sell zone for my entries over here, and I covered my stop loss above the highs there. So this was quite lucky because we can see that price actually wicked above the zone, but we failed to close it above it before we actually dropped off. So given that we are pro-trend, this was the entire swing leg that came up into the 15-minute sell zone. Stop loss would be put to break even over here. And we can see that during the London session, it wasn't very fun because price just ranged sideways for a bit. And if you had put your stop loss to break even a bit too early, you might have gotten stopped out over here before the big move down. Targets for this trade would have been on the 15-minute, as mentioned previously, for these two zones over here at the bottom for 7R. So the reason why I was looking for longs during the New York session is because I understood that these lows over here were strong and they were unlikely to break. So we would hold these two demand zones and then look for longs back up towards these weak highs over here. So that was the idea behind the long trade, even though overall the higher time frame is bearish. On the 15-minute, we can also see that price was just wicking into this last extreme 5-minute demand zone. So we can see that on the 15-minute, we left this big candle over here. So I dropped down to the 5-minute to look for a clearer demand zone at that point in time. And that's when I saw this last down move. So I was looking for price to hold this area, and the wicks on the 15-minute were a clear sign. So when price swept the liquidity below all these lows over here, I was looking for longs on the lower time frame. So if we go down, we can see that the sell zone actually failed at this part here. So over here, because this is very heavily in the discounted area at a strong low, I was inclined to take the longs over here. But also because I understand that we are fighting the overall higher time frame trend, I would be very quick to go break even on this trade since we are fighting the trend. So once price got tapped in over at this demand zone that caused the failure of this sell zone, my stop loss would be trailed to break even once we clear these highs actually. So this would help you protect your trade in case price decides to continue on according to the higher time frame trend and then just fall off from this area. So it is risky to go in right at the extreme, obviously, but your risk reward should pay off if you do manage to get it in right at the lows. So for targets wise, I was looking to target this 15-minute sell zone over here because we did have a chain forming. So we can see that price just pushed up straight towards it, and then yep, you're done with the trade during the New York session for about 17R. Moving on to GU, we can see the same structure forming here with this big push up leaving behind this demand zone over here. So over on this area here, the 10-minute would have been cleaner for you to find that extreme demand zone. So once we see that price respected this 15-minute sell zone and it broke structure over here overnight, continuing with Asian sessions break up structure, I was looking for price to actually come into this 15-minute sell zone that caused this break of structure here during the London Open. So once price came into this zone, I dropped down to the 1 minute. So London session open is this vertical line over here. If you had taken a trade earlier on before London Open, you would have gotten stopped up when price drove deeper into the sell zone. Since we already had bearish structure shift over at this point here when price first tapped into the sell zone, I knew that we could look for shorts, just that during the London Open, I wanted to see a continued failure of the demand zones over here, which we did get over at this point here. So the first entry you could have taken after you see this demand zone failing was at this sell zone over here that caused this demand zone to fail. So this is not the cleanest sell zone because price did pull back before going down here. So if you had taken this sell zone over here, you probably would have gotten stopped out when price wicked over at this point here. However, for me, the entry was over at this extreme sell zone over here, and usually I give a 2-pip buffer on GU. So you can see over at this point here, we've barely stayed into the trade. If you do miss this one, however, it's fine because there is another entry here. When this demand zone fails, you can look to get in on this extreme sell zone over here, which is a lot cleaner. So I'll talk about this entry and how I managed it. So over on GU, because the price action is not clean in this entire range here, my point to go break even on the trade would have been this area, because if you compare EU versus GU's price action, after we tapped into the 15-minute sell zone, EU just fell off immediately, whereas for GU, you see that we are still ranging within that area. So I would just be a bit more aggressive with my stop loss management. So once we tapped into that extreme sell zone that caused this demand zone to fail, I would push my stop loss to break even once price clears this low over here. And for targets, I will be looking for that demand zone right at the bottom that started this big push up. So overall, this trade will have given me 18R. And when we come into the New York session, we can see that price came into that zone, and that's when we drop down to the 1 minute. And we can see that over here, once price tapped into the 10-minute zone, it kept holding those areas, failed to close below, just wicking the bottom, grabbing liquidity, and then we finally had another shift of structure over at this point in time. So I knew that price was bullish. I looked for the extreme demand zone that swept liquidity, and that's where I placed my entry over on this candle over here. So once price cleared these highs here, stop loss would be put to break even, and then we can look to target that 15-minute sell zone that caused this break of structure over here. So you can see after that, that price just pushes up, taps it during the New York session, and continues to range the next day. So this trade will have netted you about 8R on the longs during New York. So finally on AU, usually I only trade it during the New York session, which would start around this area here, this second vertical line. So I did not take the shots during the London session, but I was looking for longs, same as EU and GU during the New York session. But the same thing applies. You can see that we still continued to BOS over on the Asian session, and then this was the extreme 15-minute sell zone that price respected. So if you like, for some practice, just go onto the 1 minute and look for your entries at this 15-minute sell zone. Take it down towards this 15-minute demand zone at the bottom that caused this big move up here that broke structure. So let's look at the entries during the New York session for AU. And initially, my 15-minute was drawn up at this last down move, but we can see that the momentum only came in on this last candle over here that was bullish. We ranged for a bit, price jabbed into that demand zone that was created by that red candle over here, and then we started to push up. So I refined the 15-minute demand zone to this blue candle over here where momentum kicked in to break structure at this point. So when price came into that demand zone, I was waiting on the 1 minute to see the structure change. So if we go down to that area, so we can see that there were multiple entries at this point in time. So this would have been the 15-minute demand zone that we tapped into. We can see that price actually came down, tapped into the zone, created a lower high, broke structure again, and then we broke both this and this high with the wick over here. So I knew that it was bullish. So the first entry longs could have been done on this demand zone that caused this sell zone over here to fail. So once we see this, is an indication that we can go long from this area. And similarly to EU and GU, the lows that were created at this area here, these were strong lows, so it was higher chance that this will hold for us to head towards these wick highs over here. So back onto the 1 minute, we can see when price failed this demand zone, this supply zone over here and wicked above it, Your first entry could have been taken when price came back to this demand zone over at this candle here, stop loss to cover the low. So since this was the last structural high that came into the 15-minute demand zone, once price clears this, only then would I be willing to go break even on the trade. So this would have been the first entry, and after that we can see that price broke the highs again. So this is an indication that we are continuing to hold the bullish momentum, and the demand chain is also forming at the bottom here where the 1 minute is holding the area. So the second entry could be taken on this extreme demand zone here when price broke above the highs. So you can see that price is very choppy, ranging for a bit first, because I think yesterday there wasn't any news, but we do have some US dollar pending home sales news which caused that push that happened after that. That could have been the reason why price was ranging pending both the home sales as well as the crude oil at that timing. So once we had that news and price cleared these highs, stop loss was put to break even. So if we look at the targets, same thing. This was the last 50-minute sell zone where we had internal liquidity not swept yet, so that was the area where I was targeting. You could also target these highs here because you know that they are weak. However, because I didn't want to hold the trade overnight, so I was just looking for the nearest high probability targets to hold it. But as you can see, price swept the highs because they were weak over at this point the next day. So these two trades would have netted me 11.5 R on the first one and 9 R on the second one, so for a total of 20. So yeah, that's how you have gotten all the trades on EU, AU and GU. So if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments down below or drop me a DM on Instagram.